I was appalled. It's really unacceptable for a U.S. president to ask the president of an adversary, a competitor, personally to give him some space so that he can move more in the adversary's direction after the election. And it was very revealing, I think, not just about missile defense, but as the president himself said, about the whole range of U.S.-Russian issues. Moreover, since now the whole world knows about this conversation, both friends and adversaries of the United States around the world are going to point to that and say, that's the real Barack Obama. So I think what many people have said for the past several years is that once this election is over, if President Obama is reelected, it's really Katie barred the door on his initiatives internationally and domestically are absolutely right.
As you said, he was talking about the missile defense system, but what stops him from applying this to issues like the Second Amendment? And in the past, you have said to me that if the president gets 4 more years, we're in big trouble. And here is the president admitting in his own words exactly that.
No, I think you couldn't get a clearer example. And you know, the strategy of many of the gun control advocates in the United States, recognizing they can't get through Congress or many of the state governments the kind of legislation they want, have long looked at the international arena to accomplish their objectives. And of course, the president under our system has the predominant authority in foreign policy. Once the president is free of ever having to face the voters again, what he will do in negotiation is very, very worrying. I'd have to say I was surprised in his first 3 years in office that he didn't do more to try and give away Second Amendment rights internationally. I think obviously because he was looking at the November election. But once he's past that, if he prevails, he doesn't have to worry about that again. And I think the risk of an arms trade treaty or other measures at the UN are going to increase significantly.
Well, what do you say to the people who've said, hey, if he wanted to do it, he would have done it in the first 4 years because, hey, he has no idea whether he's going to be reelected? What do you say to people like that?
Well, I think there's some advantage to the president in terms of domestic issues when he had huge majorities in Congress. And he took advantage of it. But in international affairs in particular, in a second term where the president's authority is really almost without limit, all he needs to worry about is getting Senate ratification for the treaties. But even beyond that, this administration is very conscious of trying to create what some people call customary international law. So he's in a position to sign a treaty and then say, well, we've declared our intention to ratify it, so I'm going to abide by it even if the Senate hasn't acted. And then you get into a very murky area where the president's ability to use executive orders or other executive branch authorities really comes into play. So this is not hypothetical. I think this is something to be quite concerned about if he's reelected.
You also call President Obama the post-American president. It seems like he's sure living up to that term.
I thought those remarks to Russian President Medvedev were very revealing because he was talking to the president of a foreign country, and I think an adversarial country, in a way he was obviously not comfortable talking to the American people. Because he was saying, when he said, give me space, he was saying, don't press me on this issue in an election year. Don't make me speak publicly in a way the American people will hear what I have to say. So that's really confiding in a foreign leader in a way he's not sharing with the American public. And I think that in many respects is even more disturbing than the substance of what he was saying, that he's more relaxed talking to Dmitry Medvedev than he is to the American voter. What does that tell you?
And it's an issue of trust. I mean, how can the American voter actually trust somebody who won't be honest with what his plans are?
Well, you have to ask, if he's saying that to Medvedev in what he obviously thought was a private moment, what is he telling other foreign leaders?
And what about when he's meeting with President Calderon of Mexico? He's also meeting with the Prime Minister of Canada, but specifically with Mexico, when you look at the fact that you have a president who went there, apologized for our Second Amendment, has signed on to an arms trade treaty that Mexico is leading the charge on when it comes to civilian ownership. I mean, we have no idea what he's going to agree to do behind closed doors with Calderon now.
Well, no, you know, and exactly, President Calderon has basically accused the United States for the internal problems of Mexico, for the violence that the drug cartels have carried out, the murders, the destruction of Mexican civil society, the huge increase in drug trafficking through Mexico into the United States. It wouldn't be surprising if President Obama was saying to President Calderon, you know, I basically agree with you, but we've got this problem with Fast and Furious. My Attorney General is under attack. Give me some space until after the election and we'll deal with the gun issue then. I would be very worried about that. And I think every time that clip runs, it's legitimate to say, is that typical of the way Obama negotiates with foreign leaders? Is that our strong American president?
And what is America going to look like if he has 4 more years? Is it the America we know, or is it going to be the America that he wants to be, more like a part of the European Union?
No, I think that's exactly right. And that's why the concern really ought to be not just on the international issues, but on domestic issues as well. And it really, I think, points up a fundamental problem that the president's view of his responsibilities right now is limited to getting himself reelected in November. And I think that undercuts comments he would make across the board on a whole range of issues. It also highlights, I think, the importance of Supreme Court nominations in a second term. You know, we've just had the arguments about the constitutionality of Obamacare, and I think almost everybody, whether they support the constitutionality of the law or oppose it, think that it will be a very narrow decision, one way or the other, upholding the law or striking it down. And that demonstrates how narrow the margins are on the Supreme Court and how important the 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 nominations that might take place in the next term of the president.
And again, you've got to worry about what happens with the issues like the Second Amendment.
No, exactly. It's a narrowly divided court on the Second Amendment today. Switching 1 or 2 justices could make a huge difference. And that's why I think it's important for people to consider what kind of president do you want naming judges to the lower judiciary, but justices to the Supreme Court as well.
And you know, John, I was just up at the United Nations for some meetings on the Program of Action, and I have to tell you, if they have their way, they want to do everything they can to redo what you stopped in 2001. You hear that. What concerns you most about where we are headed when you look at what the UN's trying to do with the support of Obama?
Well, I think for the 8 years of the Bush administration, those who wanted to use international treaties to limit our Second Amendment rights in this country were largely frustrated. I think they believed when Obama came in they would make swift progress, and they made progress, no doubt about it, not as much as they would like, because Obama was calculating the political impact to him domestically. The Medvedev remark demonstrates that his political calculus is really focused on this November. So I think the gun control advocates internationally are saying to themselves, okay, we're happy to give Obama space. We'll prepare for what will come after the election, but we won't force him to take positions that could harm him in his re-election effort. But after the election is over, we do want swift action on an arms trade treaty. And really, there's no point in being shy about it anymore. We want very express limitations on private ownership of firearms, international commerce in firearms, and really to force the United States into the European mold. That's their objective. That's been their objective for 15 or 20 years. I think they're getting very agitated that they haven't made more progress, and they want to see it in a second Obama term.
When you look at the atmosphere right now at the United Nations, you know in July it is going to be a real fight. Do you think, though, that they'll actually approve a treaty in July?
My sense is that the tactics of the gun control advocates is to push hard and then magnanimously give Obama his space on the condition that the day after the election he deliver and give them even more restrictive provisions than they've asked for a long time. So I think tactically we're in a very dangerous moment now, and it underlines why both in the short term and the long term it's so important to have a president who understands and believes in the Second Amendment.
And this is a president, as you've said in the past, he doesn't really believe in American exceptionism. He doesn't see America and our laws the way we do.
He wants America to be more like Europe. He wants it to be more like Europe economically. He wants it to be more like Europe in terms of foreign policy. He wants it to be more like Europe in terms of Second Amendment rights. He is a very radical president. He is post-American. So this is something that I think voters have been able to see his record for 4 years now. They really have to issue a judgment in November.
But you know, this time around at the UN, there isn't a John Bolton. And you've got the pro-gun NGOs, but already you've seen that they limit the amount of time they can speak. Then they give the anti-gun NGOs 55 minutes when they give the pro-guns 5 minutes. Doesn't sound like a big issue, but it is a big issue because whose voice is really going to be heard?
Yeah, I can tell you from my own experience when I was at the United Nations that the pro-gun NGOs were just invaluable in what they were able to pick up in terms of corridor gossip, what they were able to hear being discussed, and just in providing intelligence and support for a hardline American position. But they're very isolated now. It's like guerrilla warfare at the UN. I know well what they're going through. They need an administration that can hold the line. And that's a perfect example of why this election is so important.
Also coming up, the annual meeting for the NRA, the celebration of American values. Important always, but do you see it having an extra significance this time around because it is an election year?
I think this could be the most important discussion yet in a long time. You know, the Obama position on Obamacare really shows a disregard for constitutional limitations on government power. And I think that's his approach across the board. He would say, I'm doing good things, don't allow this Constitution to limit me. But the Founding Fathers were a lot more skeptical about the consequences and the motivations of somebody saying, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. That's why we have the Bill of Rights. That's why we have the Second Amendment. This is a time for everybody to reflect on that and to make sure that they understand just what's at stake in this presidential and congressional election in November.
I mean, we're lucky we heard what he said to the Russian president. He didn't want us to hear it, but we're lucky we did. But do you think that's going to stop him?
Well, I think obviously he's very embarrassed by having that out there. But this is a confident man. He is convinced history is on his side. He won a big election in 2008. He had supermajorities in Congress. He's convinced he's right, and he's convinced that history is going to vindicate him. So he's prepared, as he said, to play the long game. And he knows the long game for him really begins the day after the election if he's reelected. So I don't think really anything he says between now and then has any credibility. I think all of it is devoted to getting himself past the American public in November, and that's why we've got to be vigilant. That's why we've got to get all these issues out there, get them debated, let the American people know where he really stands.
When you say he's willing to play the long game, sounds like UN speak, doesn't it?
Well, look, this is the European Social Democratic view. They've got real patience, and Americans, one of our virtues is we're not patient. We want to make progress now, but we've got to settle in here, and you know, we don't know who the nominees will be. We don't know who the Republican will be. It may be that it's somebody who doesn't satisfy everybody. All I can say is the issue here is it's Obama versus whoever that nominee is, and you better think long and hard before you stay home and say that there's no difference between the opponent and Obama, because there's a huge difference.
When you go to the meeting, I know you're going to be involved in the annual meeting, what's your message? What do you want to leave those people with before we head into the November election?
Well, I think that as important as the American economy is, and everybody wants the recovery really to begin, we want sustained American prosperity, you can't have prosperity and freedom here at home unless you've got a strong America internationally, protecting our interests and our friends around the world. That's what holds the ring that gives American society the chance to be free and prosperous, to enjoy all of our liberties, including the Second Amendment. If we're not devoted to protecting America around the world, we're going to be much more constrained here at home.
And when you look at where we are, have you ever been so concerned about where America is headed as you are this time around?
I think we're in retreat all the way around the world. Our adversaries and our friends, too, see we've got a weak president. They see that he doesn't pay adequate attention to the broader world. They see he's consumed by his domestic agenda. And they see him almost begging the president of Russia, just give him a little space. That doesn't impress them. Weakness doesn't impress our adversaries. Strength impresses them. And that's what we need from a new president. That's the kind of leadership we need.
And Wayne LaPierre is asking people this election, are you all in? And it sure sounds like you are all in.
I am all in, whatever it takes to defeat Obama. It is absolutely critical for our future.